The ruins of Thera's repair shop crumbled around her as another tremor shook the ground. Through the settling dust, she could see the red warning lights flashing across the colony's dome, a sight that had become all too familiar in the past week. The geological instability of their moon was getting worse, and with each passing day, more of the colony's inhabitants fled to safer worlds. Thera's delicate antenna quivered as she salvaged what tools she could from the wreckage. As a sylphid, her slight build and naturally skilled hands had made her an excellent mechanic, but those same traits now marked her as vulnerable in a crisis. Being a widow only made things worse. No clan would take responsibility for her, especially not during an evacuation. The sound of boots crunching through debris made her spin around, tool kit clutched protectively to her chest. A human stood in the doorway, backlit by the emergency lights. He was tall, like all humans, with broad shoulders and weather-worn features that spoke of years spent in space. "Shop's closed," Thera said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Permanently, it seems." The human stepped forward, ducking under a fallen beam. "Actually, I'm here because I heard you're the best mechanic in the sector. Name's Daniel Kovac." Thera's second set of eyelids flickered in surprise. "You're a bit late. In case you hadn't noticed, this whole colony is about to tear itself apart. Exactly why I'm here." Daniel gestured at the chaos outside. "I captain a freelance cargo ship, the Star Weaver. We're helping with the evacuation, but my chief engineer was injured in the last quake. I need someone who can keep my ship running while we get these people to safety." Thera's antenna drooped. "You want to hire me? Now? Unless you'd rather stay here and watch the place collapse." Another tremor emphasized his point, sending more dust cascading from the ceiling. She studied him carefully. Humans had a reputation for being unpredictable, but they also had a strange honor code about helping others in crisis. And right now, she had nothing left to lose. "What's the pay?" she asked. Daniel's weathered face broke into a slight smile. "Room, board, and a full crew share. Plus, you'll be helping save lives." Before Thera could respond, a violent shake sent them both stumbling. A support beam groaned ominously above them. "Time's up," Daniel said, extending his hand. "You in?" Thera looked around at her ruined shop, at the life she'd built from nothing after her mate's death. Another tremor made the decision for her. She grabbed Daniel's hand, surprised by its warmth. "Lead the way, Captain." They ran through the deteriorating colony, dodging falling debris in panicked evacuees. The Star Weaver sat on one of the few remaining stable landing pads, a Corsair-class medium freighter that had clearly seen better days, but its engines hummed with well-maintained power. As they approached, Thera saw crews loading civilians into other ships nearby. The air was thick with dust and fear. A young sylphid mother clutched her child, both their antennae flat against their heads in terror. Daniel noticed her looking. "We'll come back for more once we've dropped the first group at the safe zone. Every ship helps." Inside the Star Weaver, organized chaos reigned. Crew members of various species rushed to secure supplies and assist refugees. Daniel led Thera to the engine room, where coolant leaked from a cracked pipe and warning lights flashed on multiple systems. "Can you handle it?" he asked. Thera was already moving, her four-fingered hands dancing over the diagnostic panel. "The secondary coolant loop is shot, and you've got power fluctuations in the starboard thrust array. But yes, I can handle it. Get us in the air, Captain." Daniel nodded and headed for the bridge. Through the hull, Thera felt more tremors racking the dying colony. As she worked to stabilize the ship's systems, she realized this wasn't just a job, it was a chance to help others avoid the loss she'd experienced. Maybe that's why the human captain had chosen her. Sometimes those who had lost everything were the ones who fought hardest to save others. The engines roared to life under her careful adjustments, and the Star Weaver lifted off just as another section of the colony collapsed. Through the engine room viewport, Thera watched her old life disappear into the dust clouds below. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since becoming a widow, she felt something like hope. 2 weeks aboard the Star Weaver had taught Thera more about humans than she'd learned in all her previous years. They were paradoxes wrapped in warm skin, reckless yet calculating, emotional yet practical. Captain Daniel Kovac embodied these contradictions perfectly. She watched him now from her position in the engine room doorway as he argued with their latest client, a wealthy merchant who'd hired them to transport delicate machinery. The cargo had turned out to be refugees from another failing colony, hidden in stasis pods to bypass immigration restrictions. "We agreed on payment for cargo transport," the merchant insisted, his scaled face flushing dark green with anger. "Not asylum seekers." Daniel stood his ground, arms crossed. "You lied about the cargo, which voids our contract. But since these people need help, here's the new deal, we take them to a safe port, and you pay double." "Double?" The merchant's tail lashed. "You're insane." "No, I'm being generous. Because my other option is reporting you for human trafficking." The merchant's scales paled. After more grumbling and threats, he transferred the credits. Once he was gone, Daniel's shoulders slumped slightly. "You knew they were refugees before we took the job," Thera said. "It wasn't a question." Daniel turned, not surprised to find her there. He'd grown used to her quiet observations. The manifest listed power requirements for the stasis pods. "Machinery doesn't need life support. And the double payment? Goes to helping them resettle." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "Not all humans are good people, Thera. But we try to balance the scales when we can." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken by the ship's familiar hum. Over the past weeks, Thera had restored the Star Weaver to peak condition, her skilled touch healing years of hasty repairs. The crew had started calling her the Ship Whisperer, a human phrase she found oddly touching. "Captain," First Mate Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm, "we've got a problem. Long-range sensors picking up raiders." Daniel was moving before she finished speaking. Thera followed him to the bridge, her antenna detecting the crew's rising tension. Raiders had been growing bolder since the colonial evacuations began, preying on vulnerable refugee ships. "How many?" Daniel asked, sliding into the pilot's seat. "3 ships, Hammerhead class. They've spotted us." Thera's hearts clenched. Hammerheads were built for overwhelming force, not speed. But with 40 refugees in stasis, they couldn't risk a direct confrontation. "Thera," Daniel said without turning, "how much can you give the engines?" She was already calculating. "The new cooling system can handle 120% for 10 minutes. Push harder and we'll burn out the coils." "What about 130% for 5 minutes?" "Captain, that would dash." "Would it work?" She met his eyes, understanding the stakes. "Yes. Once." Daniel's hands flew over the controls. "That's all we need. Everyone strap in." The Star Weaver surged forward as Thera raced back to engineering. Her modifications to the engines were about to be tested beyond their limits. Warning lights flashed as she rerouted power, her movements swift and sure despite the ship's violent maneuvers. Through the hull, she felt weapons fire impact their shields. The raiders were closing in, trying to disable them. But they didn't understand what the Star Weaver could do, what she had made it capable of. "Now, Captain," she called over the comm. The ship leaped forward like a living thing, engines screaming as they poured out energy. Thera worked frantically to manage the power flow, her antenna flat against her head from the G-forces. Warning alerts blared as components redlined, but she had built in just enough safety margin. Just enough. When they finally dropped back to normal speed, the raiders were far behind, and the engine cores were cooling. They had made it. Engineering, Daniel's voice was calm despite what they'd just done. "Status? We'll need to replace the coils at the next port," Thera reported, patting the thrumming engine housing. But she'll hold together. Good work. There was something in his voice, pride. Relief? Meet me in the galley when you're done. I think we all need a drink. Later, sharing the human drink called whiskey with the crew, Thera realized something had changed. They no longer saw her as just a mechanic, or even just a refugee. She had helped save their ship, their passengers, their lives. She had become part of the crew. Daniel raised his glass to her. To the ship whisperer. As the others echoed the toast, Thera felt her antenna curl with pleasure. She had lost her home, but perhaps she had found something else, something she hadn't even known she was looking for. The space station's marketplace buzzed with activity, but Thera barely noticed the chaos around her. Her attention was fixed on the small hologram floating above her palm, news from her home colony. The geological stabilizers had finally failed completely. Everything she had known was gone. Thought I'd find you here. Daniel's voice startled her from her thoughts. He settled beside her at the viewport, his reflection joining hers in the crystalline window. Bad news? Thera closed her fist, extinguishing the hologram. Nothing unexpected. Just, final. She forced her antenna to remain still, not wanting to broadcast her distress the way her species usually did. But Daniel had learned to read her moods even without antenna signals. He pulled something from his jacket, a small, wrapped package. Here. Was going to save this for later, but maybe now's better. Curious despite her melancholy, Thera unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a toolkit, but not just any toolkit. These were artisan-grade micro-adjusters, precise enough for the most delicate repairs. They must have cost a fortune. Captain, I can't dash. You can, he said firmly. After that stunt you pulled saving the refugee ship last week. You've more than earned them. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Besides, keeping the Star Weaver running smooth means keeping us all alive. Consider it a survival investment. The tools gleamed in her hands, and Thera felt warmth spread through her chest. Among her people, such personal gifts were reserved for family or. She pushed that thought away quickly. Thank you, she said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The station's warning klaxon shattered the silence. Attention all vessels. Incoming solar storm. Magnitude 7. All ships must clear docking within 30 minutes. Daniel was instantly alert. That's not good. Storm that size could trap us here for days. He activated his comm. Rodriguez, get the crew back to the ship. Thera dash. Already on it. She was running calculations in her head. The new shield modulators should hold, but we'll need to reinforce the port side arrays. They rushed back to the Star Weaver, working in seamless coordination. As Thera modified the shields, she heard Daniel arguing with station control. What do you mean they're still out there? I don't care about jurisdiction. There's a civilian transport stranded in the asteroid belt. Thera's antenna perked up. She knew that tone. Daniel had that particular strain in his voice that meant he was about to do something either brave or stupid. Usually both. Sure enough, he appeared in the engine room doorway. How fast can you get us ready for rescue ops? In this storm? We'd be flying blind. But her hands were already moving over the controls, making the necessary adjustments. The magnetic interference will kill our sensors. Then we'll have to do it the old way. He gave her that half-smile that always made her hearts beat faster. Think you can rig something up? Thera thought for a moment, her new tools glinting in their case. Maybe. If we modify the old-style radio array, tune it to the transport's emergency beacon frequency, we could triangulate their position even through the storm. How long? 20 minutes. But Captain. She met his gaze. It's still incredibly dangerous. Daniel stepped closer, and Thera found herself acutely aware of his presence. Do you trust me? Yes. The word came without hesitation, surprising them both. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that made her antenna curl involuntarily. Then he nodded. Get it done. I'll prep for launch. The next hours were a blur of desperate activity. They found the transport, its engines dead, spinning helplessly as the storm's first waves hit. The rescue was harrowing, lightning-like energy discharges raked their shields, and twice they nearly lost their magnetic grapple. But they succeeded. As the rescued passengers were led to safety, Thera watched Daniel checking on each one, ensuring they were cared for. He caught her looking and walked over. Couldn't have done it without you, he said. You would have tried anyway, she replied, her antenna betraying her fondness. Probably. But I wouldn't have succeeded. He touched her shoulder lightly, a gesture that sent tingles through her entire body. You make us better, Thera. Make me better. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Then Rodriguez called for him, and the spell broke. But as Daniel walked away, Thera knew something had shifted. The loss of her old home didn't hurt quite as much anymore. Because somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, she had found a new one. And perhaps, she was beginning to realize, something even more precious than that. The distress call came at ship's midnight, when most of the crew was asleep. Thera was in engineering, making minor adjustments to the quantum regulator, when Daniel's voice crackled through the comm. All hands to stations. Thera, bridge. Now. She found him staring at a holographic display, his face illuminated by its red glow. It showed a massive colony ship, its engines dark, drifting toward a gas giant's crushing atmosphere. The Celestial Dawn, he said without turning. 5,000 colonists aboard. Life support failing. Thera's antenna went rigid. That's impossible. The Dawn is a Horizon-class vessel. They have redundant systems for everything. Daniel corrected grimly. Look at these readings. She studied the data and felt her heart sink. The ship's core systems had been sabotaged, deliberately and expertly. Someone had wanted this to happen. We're the only ship in range, Daniel continued. But there's more. The Dawn's manifest lists several hundred Sylphid refugees aboard. Thera's hands tightened on the console. Her people, survivors from other collapsed colonies like her own. How long? 2 hours before they hit the atmosphere. Maybe less. Rodriguez spoke up from her station. Captain, we're not equipped for this. The Star Weaver can't tow a ship that size. No, Daniel agreed. But we can dock and evacuate as many as we can. He turned to Thera. I need options. She was already calculating. Their main docking ports will be locked down with the power loss. But if we can reach the emergency airlocks. Her fingers flew over the controls. Yes. I can rig a bypass. We'd have to extend our shields around their hull section to protect from the atmospheric effects. That'll drain our power reserves, Rodriguez warned. Then we'll work fast. Daniel's voice had that tone of quiet determination that Thera had come to rely on. Plot an intercept course. Thera, you'll lead the boarding team. She looked up sharply. Me? You know Horizon-class systems better than anyone. And your people will trust you. His eyes met hers. I'll be going with you. Captain, Rodriguez protested, regulations state dash. To hell with regulations. Daniel's voice was steel. I'm not sending her in there alone. The next hour was organized chaos as they prepared. Thera modified their docking equipment while Daniel briefed the rescue team. As she worked, she caught fragments of crew conversations, whispered concerns about the suicide mission they were attempting. They weren't wrong. The gas giant's gravity well would be trying to tear them apart the entire time. One wrong move, One system failure, and both ships would be lost. Finally, they were in position. The celestial dawn loomed before them, impossibly huge against the swirling orange backdrop of the gas giant. Thera stood with Daniel in the airlock, both suited up for the rescue. "Last chance to back out," he said softly. She checked her tool belt, including the precious micro-adjusters he'd given her. Not a chance. The docking was perfect, Thera's modifications worked exactly as planned. They cut through into the Dawn's secondary corridor, emergency lights casting everything in a ghostly red glow. "Life support at 18%, Thera reported, checking her scanner. "Temperature dropping. We need to work fast." They split into teams, racing through the dying ship. Thera led her group to the Sylphid section, where hundreds of her people huddled in the cold. When they saw one of their own leading the rescuers, their antenna lifted in hope. But as they worked to evacuate the colonists, Thera's scanner picked up something else, an energy signature that shouldn't have been there. She followed it to a sealed compartment. "Captain," she called over the comm, "I've found something. Sublevel 3, Section D." Daniel joined her minutes later. Together, they forced open the door, and found the proof of sabotage. A sophisticated device was attached to the ship's main power core, still slowly draining its energy. "This is military grade," Thera whispered. "Someone wanted these people to die. But why?" Before Daniel could respond, a new alarm blared. Rodriguez's voice cut through their comms, "Captain. The atmospheric storms are intensifying. We're losing our shield stability." Daniel grabbed Thera's arm. "How many more colonists?" "At least 1,000 still aboard. We can't leave them." The ship groaned around them as the gas giant's gravity pulled harder. They had minutes, at most. Daniel's face was invisible behind his helmet, but his voice was clear. "Get back to the Star Weaver. Start the evacuation pods." "What are you doing?" He was already moving toward the device. "This thing's draining power. Let's drain it back. Might buy us enough time to save everyone." "That's crazy. The feedback could kill you." "Then I guess you'll have to stop that from happening." He paused, and even through the suit, she felt the intensity of his gaze. "I trust you, Thera. Always have." Her heart pounded as she realized what she had to do. And what she had to say, what she might never get another chance to say. But there was no time. The ship shuddered again, and they both knew, it was now or never. In that frozen moment, as alarms blared and the massive colony ship groaned around them, Thera made her decision. She pulled out her precious micro-adjusters, Daniel's gift, and moved to his side. "Together," she said firmly. "Like everything else." He started to protest, but she cut him off. "You trust me? Then trust this. The device needs 2 power conduits reversed simultaneously. One person can't do it without being electrocuted." The ship lurched violently. Through the viewport, the gas giant's swirling storms reached for them like hungry fingers. Rodriguez's voice crackled through their comms, 10 minutes to atmospheric entry. They worked in perfect synchronization, Thera's delicate fingers and Daniel's steady hands moving as one. The sabotage device hummed dangerously as they exposed its core. "On 3, Thera said. "If we time this wrong, we won't." Daniel's voice held absolute certainty. "Ready? Wait." Her antenna trembled beneath her helmet. "Daniel, among my people, we don't say certain things unless we're sure. Unless we've had time to know our hearts completely." Another violent shudder rocked the ship. Warning lights flashed. "I'm sure," she said simply. Even through his faceplate, she saw his eyes widen with understanding. Then he smiled, that warm, crooked smile that had first given her hope in the ruins of her shop. "I'm sure too," he said softly. Then, louder, 3. They moved together, reversing the power flow. Energy surged through the device, through their suits, through the ship itself. Thera felt her muscles seize as residual current crackled around them, but she held steady. Had to hold steady. The device sparked, sputtered, and then, with a flash that left them blinking, released its stored power back into the colony's ship systems. Power restoration at 60%. Rodriguez reported. Shield stabilizing. Get those evacuation pods launched, Daniel ordered, already helping Thera to her feet. All teams, full speed on the evacuation. We've got a chance now, let's not waste it. The next hours were a blur of desperate activity. They worked tirelessly, loading colonists into pods, coordinating with the newly powered ship systems to maintain position just outside the atmosphere's grip. Every minute brought them closer to safety, yet felt like it might be their last. Finally, Rodriguez's voice came again, last pod away, Captain. All colonists accounted for. Thera sagged against the corridor wall, exhaustion hitting her all at once. They had done it. They had saved them all. Daniel's hand found hers, squeezing gently through their suits. Ready to go home? Home. The word held new meaning now. She squeezed back. Yes. Later, after they had cleared the gas giant's influence and the adrenaline had faded, they stood together in the Starweaver's observation deck. Below them, the evacuation pods were being collected by arriving rescue ships, their precious cargo of lives saved through what some were already calling impossible odds. The saboteurs will be found, Daniel said, watching the scene below. The device's signature was unique, military intelligence is already tracing it. Good. Thera's antenna curled contentedly as she felt his arm slip around her waist. Though I suspect they'll be more careful targeting colony ships in the future, knowing the Starweaver might show up. He chuckled. Speaking of the future. He turned to face her fully. I know your people have traditions about these things. And I know I'm not exactly what your family would have chosen for you. My family would have chosen safety, she said softly. A quiet life, a predictable path. But I chose something else. Someone else. Even though I keep flying us into danger. Her antenna brushed his cheek gently, an intimate gesture among her people. Especially because of that. Because you taught me that sometimes the greatest love isn't about being safe. It's about being brave enough to risk everything for what matters. Daniel's hand came up to carefully trace one of her antennae, making her shiver. I'm still learning your customs, he said. But I believe this means we're engaged now. Thera laughed, a sound of pure joy she hadn't made since before losing her first mate. By my people's traditions, we've been engaged since I helped you reverse that power core. Facing death together is a rather serious commitment. In that case. He pulled her closer. I should probably kiss you now. If that's allowed. Instead of answering, she rose on her toes to press her lips to his. It was different from kissing her own kind, warmer, softer, but perfect in its own way. Like everything about them. When they finally parted, the gas giant's light painted colors across their faces. Behind them, the Starweaver hummed contentedly, ready for whatever adventure awaited its crew, and its newly united captain and engineer. Where to now? Thera asked, though she already knew the answer. Daniel smiled that smile that had first changed her world. Wherever the stars take us. Together. And as they stood there, watching the rescue ships guide their saved colonists to safety, Thera knew she had found something far greater than she'd lost. Not just a home, or a purpose, or even love, though she had found all of those things. She had found her future. And it was more beautiful than she could have imagined.